Well, welcome again, everyone. This is Dan Gingiss, customer experience speaker and coach, and so happy to have you here on the Experience Maker Show. We are live and taking your questions, so please introduce yourself in the comments and leave your questions for our special guest today, and we'll be sure to get them answered in what will definitely be the fastest half an hour on the internet, at least today. So, as usual, I like to bring thought leaders, people who are experience makers and/or who teach others to be experience makers in their business. And the person who is our guest today certainly does both of those. He is a Hall of Fame keynote speaker, a multi-time bestseller, and probably the best voice on the stage that you'll hear. Mr. Scott McKain, how are you, sir?
I'm fine. No,
Come on, I don't recognize you.
You have a this, man. I can hardly wait to hear what I have to say after an introduction like that. Golly, Dan, you rock. Thank you. It's great being with you. And it's always great when we have a chance to connect, my friend. Thank you for having me.
It is. I love chatting with you, and I know that you honed that voice in radio earlier on in your career. Is that right?
I started working in radio on my 14th birthday. And it was more because my parents owned a local grocery store, and I think the station thought they'd buy more commercials because, guys know when you're 14, your voice is changing. It doesn't it doesn't sound like this. So, but I was very fortunate. I worked for a while in radio and a while in television, and had that media background. So it's really been a nice journey.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So great to have lots of viewers here today. Mr. Strub, one of our most loyal viewers. So great for you to be here. Ryan Baker, thank you so much for being here. Ryan is also a former guest on the show. So thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. Scott, you have had a long and illustrious career. I was actually looking something up and saw that you are coming up on your 40th year of being a member of the NSA, National Speakers Association, which is incredible. Tell us something that's happened to you in the last, well, we'll go with almost 40 years, that maybe you haven't shared on stage before, or that is just sort of a fun story to help us get to know Scott McKain a little bit better.
Wow, what a great question. Yeah, and you didn't know you could become a member at 5, did you?
Exactly. It's very impressive, Scott.
I got paid for my first professional speech at 18 years old.
Wow.
I had been a state officer of FFA, the Future Farmers of America, and an ag group paid me to come speak. It was the Kentucky Farm Bureau. And I got paid for my first professional speech at 18, and so I'm really excited about it. I'm really thrilled about it, and naturally, I grew up on a farm. I grew up in a rural community, so I had a lot in common with the audience. And after the speech was over, the meeting professional hands me the check, and I said, I've got to ask. I'm really amazed. Why would you hire an 18-year-old to speak to your group? And he used the old line. He said, it's like a dog walking on its hind legs. It doesn't have to be that good. You're just amazed it can.
So that encouraged you then to make it into a career.
Yeah. So that's how I got started in the National Speakers Association, and how I got started in speaking was I was basically the dog on its hind legs. So that's awesome. That's where it all came from.
You mentioned something I want to come back to. You said that you had a lot in common with your audience. I'm wondering, because I try to use the fact that I worked in corporate America for 20 years to kind of establish that credibility with an audience, because oftentimes I was sitting in their chair.
Sure.
Tell me about a time that either you had a lot in common with an audience, or I'm assuming you've also spoken to some audiences that you've had very little in common with, but obviously you're such a great speaker, you can still inspire them. But how much does that audience relationship, that whether you really can feel like you've been in their shoes, how much does that help?
Dan, I mean, that's one of the things I've learned in the early days when I was trying to build my business. I'd take anything, any group, any thing that I've got. I remember one time I was speaking in front of a group of coal miners, and I don't know how they got the how they got the information, but it started with a guy going up and rapping on the microphone and said, "All right, we got a guy here tonight. He knows a lot of jokes and probably a lot of them are dirty. Please welcome Steve McKain." So,
hey, there you go.
but
as long as he doesn't make the check out to Steve, right?
Yeah, exactly. I want to make sure that that's right. But you know what? It was a great learning experience because the mistake that I made was trying to be all things to all people. And I went through a personal tragedy in my life and took me out of the business to a great degree for a few years. And so when I got back in, I didn't know how to make myself stand out. Why would somebody choose me instead of? I wasn't the 18-year-old that could talk anymore. Now I'm, trying to figure this out as an adult. And so I started trying to learn about what did it take to create distinction. How did you set yourself apart in the marketplace? And part of what I found in the market was that there was a lot there about differentiation. But what always struck me, my folks owned a grocery store. What I learned about the customer experience was started, working stocking shelves and waiting on customers in my family grocery store. And the line that I always used was, I could slap every customer in the face and be different, but it doesn't mean they're going to come back and buy from me again. And
Sure.
So I was looking for something that was more than merely differentiation. What would it take to create something compelling for customers? And when I couldn't find that, as I was struggling to find it in my own business, the blinding flash, the obvious was, hey, there's a lot of other folks that may need this too. And that was the journey to talking about distinction and the ultimate customer experience. We own the trademark on that term, the ultimate customer experience. And it's really been a passion of what I talk about, but more importantly, it's what I experienced from the family grocery store to other businesses where I've been an employee to organizations where I've been on their board of directors or had been an advisor consultant. It's all been part of that same journey through the combination of practical experience and being where they are and also learning. And that was the other thing. What a great learning laboratory when I was young, because I didn't have any content. So what would happen is people would come up and give me an idea. So the next speech, I'd share their idea. And one of two things would happen. Either they would write it down, which told me it was a good idea, right? That's why they're writing it down. Or somebody would come up and say, hey, I've got a better idea. So for a decade, I was really collecting this as kind of a learning laboratory of what really worked on the front line of businesses. And I was speaking to smaller businesses. Apple wasn't hiring me then, and so now when Apple does hire me, then I can speak about what's really happening on the front lines in stores and with their customers.
I love it. Man, I have so many follow-up questions. I just have to make the comment first that when my kids were younger, we used to play this game. My father owns a grocery store. And for you, it wasn't actually a game.
It was a real thing, yeah.
So that's pretty cool. But I love the word distinction. And, it is a word that makes you distinctive, obviously. But it's not a word that that is heard as often as some of the other ones, like differentiation. And I think my guess is that's one of the reasons you picked it. I also like, when I think of distinction, my family was in the formal wear business, and I kind of think of something that is just really nicely put together or higher end, as a way of being distinctive. But tell me how you use it, and I think it. I'm kind of looking for, help me better differentiate between distinction and some of these other adjectives.
Sure. I think there's three levels, Dan. And by the way, I got my prom tux at Gingiss Formal Wear.
Oh, fantastic.
I've never shared that with you before. And it's like one of those things I'm heading home. But anyway, there's three levels. The lowest level is sameness. We hear the phrase, the sea of sameness, but it is a reality. And to me, sameness is when the customer can't ascertain meaningful differentiation between you and the competition. The only way that somebody becomes a customer is that they make a choice. So how do they make that choice? Well, it's either going to be driven by there's an advantage that you have. And if they can't come up with that, then that's when it becomes a price choice. If I see no meaningful differentiation between you and the competition, then to become a customer, I have to create something. So I'll create based on price, because that's the area that's easy easiest for me to compare. So once we get beyond sameness, now we create differentiation. There's something about us that's different from our competitors. But the highest level is distinction. And that's when that differentiation becomes so meaningful. It has such traction with the marketplace that we become the provider of choice. So different isn't better unless it has real meaning for customers. I've worked with businesses, and I think I'm sure you have too, Dan, that they think that the differentiation is our logo is red. That makes you different, but it doesn't make you distinctive. And when we look at the organizations that have truly created distinction in the marketplace, or have even risen to the highest level, which is iconic, when they get to that point, there's something about them, something about the fabric of what they do. It's woven into the fabric. And in recorded history, no customer has ever said, I love doing business with those guys. They're exactly like everybody else. I mean, if you're exactly like everybody else, there's no passion to that choice. And we've got to create that in the marketplace today.
Yeah, just like nobody's ever said, let me tell you about the perfectly average restaurant I went to last night.
Yes, exactly.
So when you create distinction, then it sounds like it's possible to create distinction from the experience, obviously, but it's also, there's some companies that create distinction based off of the product or service they offer because nobody else is doing that. It seems like that's getting harder and harder to do, though. And you mentioned competing on price, which of course I like to call it a loser's game because everybody ends up losing. Competing on product, though, has become really hard too. And one of the examples I love to bring up is an example that everyone turns to as one of the most innovative companies in the world, and which is Uber, except a couple years after it launched, it was copied by Lyft and by others. And now, I don't know, is they're offering that distinctive anymore? Hard to say. So how does a company go about creating distinction? And should you be looking towards product or towards experience?
Yes. What a precise answer, right? One of the things I wrote about in the book Iconic is that customers really only have two variables by which they judge us, and that is promise and performance. So what does the customer perceive that we have promised them in advance of the relationship? And then how did we perform, judged based upon the promise? Now, you can really drill deeply into this when you start talking about customer perceptions and how they perceive the promise as opposed to, but at the bare bones, if we look at promise and performance, those are the only two factors. So that gives us four options there. One is low promise, low performance. We're, for lack of a better choice, we're Sears. We're not delivering much, but we didn't promise you much either.
I was going to say maybe the IRS.
Yeah, I mean, these are the laggards, right? I mean, they don't promise much. They don't perform exceptionally well, but we didn't expect that anyway, right?
Yeah.
Then you have high promise and low performance. Those are the frauds. They'll say anything to get the business, but once they've got the business, then they don't take care of you as a customer. They're just out making more promises to other prospects. So sooner or later it catches up with them. Those are the frauds in business. The really fascinating one to me is the low promise, high performance. Let's under promise, over deliver. Now, we've been taught for a long time that that's a good thing, but recent studies out of the University of San Diego reveal that over a period of time, customers begin to view you as manipulative if that's your approach. Because the perception becomes you're sandbagging the promise to make yourself look like a hero. You're not over delivering to help me as a customer. You're setting yourself up to manipulate how I feel about you. So that's not a good long-term strategy. So then we get high promise, high performance, and those are the disruptors. So you look at an Uber that has been there, and what they have to do is to advance the promise and simultaneously accelerate the performance. So you see Uber then getting into Uber Eats, and we've also seen their experimentation in Uber Health. One of the things they realized is one of the real roadblocks to medical care for senior citizens is simply getting to the doctor's office. So how do we get a senior citizen who might not be using a smartphone. How do we accelerate the promise of what our service can provide while we advance our performance and continue to deliver at a high level? That's breathtakingly difficult to do, but it's required of you to stay at that extraordinary level.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that especially as customers' expectations continue to increase, we have to be one of those companies that sets high expectations, that basically tells the customer up front, hang with us. And if you're willing to give us your money, we're willing to give you something exceptional. And that is what so many people are looking for these days. So I think Apple's probably another great example of that is we know every product that comes out with is going to be fantastic. I mean, when's the last time they had a dud of a product? Even when they came out with the first Apple Watch, and it didn't sell quite as well as all the other things, and everybody was wondering, oh no, maybe they screwed this up. And what did they just launch the third or fourth version? And it's still been very successful. So I think it's really interesting to set the high expectations and then be sure that you can meet them. And I would add to that, don't be afraid of high expectations. Right. I mean, why are we in business, right? I mean, we're in business to serve our customers. Without customers, we don't have a business. And so we should be doing everything we can, not just to attract them, but to keep them. Yeah. And to me, that's where this whole thing with experience comes in. Speaking of experience, my very first guest on this show, Ms. Mary Drummond, is here. Hello, Mary. Always good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, we are talking with Hall of Fame speaker and customer experience guy, Scott McKain. If you have any, and not Steve McLean, that's his long lost brother.
My alter ego.
Yeah. If you do have any questions for Scott, please put them in the comments. We'll be happy to share. So, Scott, I want to go backwards in time. And we were talking about Uber and innovation. I want to go backwards to a similar industry, and that is the taxi industry.
Oh, man.
And I know that you have, and I can even see it. I can see the book just over your right shoulder. I know that you have a classic Scott McKain story about a certain taxi. I'm hoping that you will share the abbreviated version here.
Well, I was giving a speech in Jacksonville, Florida, and the flight's late, and I'm dead tired, as you've done a million times as well, Dan. This was pre-Uber, so you get in line to get the cab, and I just want to get to the hotel and get to sleep. I've got a breakfast meeting with the client the next morning. It's already after midnight, and my cab pulls up, and the driver jumps out of the cab, points at me in the front of the line, and shouts, "Are you ready for the best cab ride of your life?"
You're like, I'm ready for a pillow, but okay.
Yeah. So I get in the back seat of the guy's cab, and he jogs over and gets my bag and puts it in his trunk and jumps in the driver's seat and spins around to me in the back and sticks out his hand and says, "Mr. McKain?" And I went, "Yeah, how'd you know my name?" He said, "Soldered your luggage tag, figured I might as well use it." He said, "I'm Taxi Terry." And I'm thinking, why did I get stuck with a motivational cab driver? Well, on the ride, he tells me these incredible things that he does to personalize the experience for his customers and to really take care of them. And he's got an iPhone in a bracket on the dash with a magnifying glass with the weather on it, so I can see the upcoming weather forecast. It's something I could have looked up on my own phone, but I thought it was cool that he thought to provide something unexpected for his customers. He recorded our conversation in the cab, and I asked him why he was so set up to do that. And he takes information from his conversation with his customers, and he enters it, he said, into my CRM. And I'm thinking, a cab driver right. So the next time he remembers what to bring up in the conversation. Crazy good stuff, right? Gets me to the hotel, jumps out of the cab, gets my bag out of the trunk. He holds my bag, my suitcase. He walks it up to the bellman, hands my luggage to the bellman, and says, "Presenting Mr. McKain."
Love it.
I've never been presented before, and he no receipt, no nothing. He's got a website. You go on the website and you print out your receipt and reserve your return trip. So it just absolutely blew me away. So I'm speaking to IBM. Next morning, I get up, I'm giving my speech. That's the biggest thing that's happened to me. And I said, hey, last night at the airport, this guy said, are you ready for the best cab ride of your life? And the audience in unison went, Taxi Terry. They're huge fans. So the kicker to the story is, so now Uber comes into play, and my project with IBM is over. I'd ridden with Terry about 15 times during the project, but now it's so now I'm going back there. So I call him. I want to make sure how he's doing, and Uber and everything else is going on. His business is better, in part because he went to companies in the Jacksonville area and he said, I'll be your vice president of transportation. You need point-to-point rides? Hey, I got great cars to do that. You need group transportation? I got vans. You need elite transportation for executives, for customers? I have a stretch limousine. You don't have to worry at all about transportation for your office. I'm your solution. Now, as long as it's about point-to-point rides, now Uber's in the conversation. But now when you're providing whatever solution that you need, and you're doing it with this ultimate customer experience, now you're creating distinction. There is a reason I choose you instead of pulling out my phone and getting a ride on Uber. I mean, I know you're going to be there. I know you're going to be in advance. I know you're going to have the vehicle that we want. I know that you're going to think ahead. It's all of the things, Dan, that you and I talk about what it takes to get customers to repeat their business and to refer the business. And I've had several friends, our pal Laura Otting being the latest one, who when they go to Jacksonville call Taxi Terry. So that and what I'm doing right now is an example of what you and I want for our clients, and that is that people tell stories about the extraordinary experience, just as I'm doing about Taxi Terry. That's what this is all about.
And that kind of storytelling is better than any marketing that any company can do, because it's so much more authentic and credible and genuine. And yeah, I'm sure everybody that you've told that story to wants to go and be in Taxi Terry's some vehicle of Taxi Terry's when they're there. It reminds me of you mentioned something that I think was super interesting about kind of comparing his service to Uber. And I find that today a lot of times people are somewhat negative towards some of the technology companies that have succeeded. And I think where we see this the most often is Amazon. And I love Amazon. I'm a Prime member. I use every service of theirs, and because it's amazing. Now, am I disappointed that certain other companies have gone out of business? Well, sure. Do I think that's entirely Amazon's fault? Not at all. And I want to give you an example. I think I may have shared this before on the show, but I know I haven't shared it with you, Scott. A lot of people bring up Toys R Us, right? And Toys R Us was a company that when they went out of business, that store looked exactly like it did when I was a kid. It had never changed. It was just products on a shelf. Whereas you compare it to something like the Lego store, where, throngs of kids rush to the Lego store because they know they can play with Legos and they can have an experience while they're there. Well, I was walking downtown Chicago and there was this mom and pop toy store. And they specialized in board games, but they had other toys as well. And there were two things that I noticed. The first, when I walked in, was that the woman behind the counter was basically a human version of Amazon's recommendation engine. She said, "Oh, you like Settlers of Catan? Well, you'll love this game and this game and this game." And I was thinking how credible that was, because she wasn't necessarily trying to sell me, but she knew the game and she knew the intricacies of how to play the game. And she knew that if I liked that kind of strategy game, I would like this kind. But the thing that really wowed me was in the back of the store, they have a board game library, and you can check out any game. You can sit down at the table and you can play the game before you buy it. And this is important because board games today, I mean, it's not like Monopoly and Clue and Sorry, where you can get them for $9.99. These are like $50, $70, $80 games. And so before you make that investment, you want to see if you like the game. Tuesday night, they have singles nights where they invite people to play board games. And I'm thinking to myself, these are all the things that Amazon can't do. So,
Exactly.
of course, a mom and pop store can thrive in an Amazon world, just as Taxi Terry can thrive in an Uber world. But you do have to be different and you have to think differently and not just lament that some big company has come and taken some business. And to me, I think that's a toy and game store that's going to last for a very long time
Yeah.
because people are willing to pay a little bit more for the experience that they're getting.
A great story. And it's so true. I mean, that's how our family grocery store survived. We had big bucks competition move in. And, my dad, without a college education, but with a heck of a lot of street smarts and common sense, said they're always going to beat us on the price of a gallon of milk. They're always going to beat us on the price of eggs. And the other thing that he had seen is when big box competition moved in, what local store owners, mom and pop stores, tried to do was match the number of hours and match their prices. And you ended up with exhausted owners who couldn't serve customers well because they were so doggone tired and stressed out because their margins were gone. And what dad did was reduce the number of hours that we were open to the prime hours of shopping and intensify the customer experience. And we did stuff like home delivery of groceries, way back then, because that's something we would do that we knew that was not in the system of a national chain. And
Yeah, that's awesome.
it made all the difference. And that's what we're talking about here. That's exactly it. And to Ryan's question here in the comments, if you
Yeah, I
don't
was
mind.
just gonna pull his up. We got a couple
Oh, good.
minutes
Okay.
left. Ryan has a great question, and he wants, and he's now covering us up, so we'll just keep it quickly. But he basically what he wants to know is it better to know a little about a lot of things, or to be really knowledgeable in one or two areas, especially as you strive to have some influence and you become a speaker and somebody that people look to.
Ryan, I researched it. My first book many years ago was called All Business is Show Business because I had the greatest part-time gig in the world. I was a movie reviewer that was syndicated all over the place. And part of what I learned from that was what Hollywood knows about the importance of being very precise with the genre. And the line that I wrote 20 some years ago was that mind share precedes market share. Most of us, all of us want to grow our business. All of us want to be successful, but we tend to think that if we're broad, that gives us more opportunity, when instead it's counterintuitive, but it's exactly the opposite. You've got to get them thinking about you before they'll invest in you, before they'll buy from you. And you can't create mind share on such a generic and broad message. I mean, no one wants to see the rom-com horror comedy action thriller with superheroes. I mean, pick the lane, get in the lane. And that was one of the great learning experiences for me, was that I thought the broader that my business was, the more opportunity it presented, when instead the more that I can make it precise, the greater I can build mind share in that specific area, and therefore the market share follows. So that's what I would certainly recommend, is to be known as really knowledgeable in a specific area.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Scott. From the perspective of being an entrepreneur and kind of starting your own company and looking at clients, the one sort of asterisk I would add on there, because I know that Ryan is also an employee of a fairly large company, is that I always found when I was in corporate America that it did benefit me to know enough to be dangerous about almost everything the company did. In fact, I often encourage, when I work for public companies, I would get my whole team together to listen to the quarterly earnings calls,
Oh yeah,
just because that was a great way to know not only what was going on in the company, but what the executives and what the media and the analysts thought was important. And so I think when you are on the flip side of where you and I are right now, which is when you're an employee for a company, I would argue that yes, you still want to be known for being an expert in something, but that it is also a good idea to either befriend people in other areas of the company or get yourself to a point where you know enough to be dangerous.
Yeah.
At least for me, oftentimes I later found myself in those roles, right? I got moved to a different part of the business, and
Yeah.
thank goodness I knew something about it because it wasn't starting from scratch. So,
Let me give
uh,
you a specific example with that. Um, what you choose about what you know is critical. Um, when I was a national FFA officer, so I'm 21 years old. Because of that, I had the privilege of having a private meeting with the then chairman of General Motors, and I asked him this question. I said, "The day that you were hired by General Motors, they probably hired 1,000 other people. I mean, at that point, General Motors was the largest employer in the United States." I said, but you became the chairman. So out of all these hundreds of thousands of employees that you have, why did you get to be the chairman? And he said, I specialized into making my team as smart and smarter than I was about whatever our project was. Because what I learned was I couldn't get promoted unless there was somebody ready to take my place. If I hadn't grown the people on my team where it was easy for them to see that somebody on my team could take my place so I could go someplace else. So he said, what I became known as was a specialist in developing other people. And it ties in with what you're saying, is that's what Thomas Murphy became known as within General Motors. And he said, so then, and I thought this was such a great line. He said, I developed a reservoir of goodwill in my organization. I had helped so many other people that then when it came down between me and another person, he said, for who's going to get the chairmanship, I had so much goodwill from other people in the organization that I became the obvious choice because I had helped them. Now they wanted to see me get this position. And he said, that's how I got there. So, it's a great distinction to make, Dan, in that you don't want to be known for knowing the most about the coronavirus. What you want to be known for is how do people get through a pandemic? Does that make sense? Because if all you know is the specialty of this particular virus, then when this virus passes, they'll find somebody else to be the specialist for the next one. But if what you know is how we deal with pandemics, now all of a sudden you're always valuable regardless of what the virus is. That's probably a bad analogy, but it's the approach of what you select as your point of distinction is going to be incredibly important in terms of longevity.
I completely agree. I mean, a lot of my experience, again, met a lot of people right out of college who wanted to be experts in social media. And that's a fine thing to be an expert in. But one of the things that I reminded them was I had never seen a company that had someone higher than a director in charge of social media. So if that's going to be your single point, then it's going to be career limiting, and maybe that's okay to you. But so I always encourage people who are in social media to learn other marketing channels. If you can market in social, you can market in email, you can market on the website.
Yeah.
They're not that different. So great points, Scott. As I promised, this is always the fastest half an hour on the internet. So I'm sad that I have to say goodbye to you so fast. But thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. You're a guy that I look up to and appreciate to call a friend, and keep doing the amazing things that you're doing.
Can I point out one last thing, Dan, before we go? And that is coming up October 16th to 18th, I'm holding the Distinction Summit, a virtual summit. It's really a deep dive into the four cornerstones of distinction and how you actually do the things that we're talking about. And so that's at distinctionsummit.com. And if they're watching you, Dan, they're a friend of mine. So if they'll just use the coupon code DISTINCT2020, Distinct 2020 gets you $100 off the registration.
I love that. Distinct 2020, the Distinction Summit, October 16th. If Scott McKain's putting it on, I can guarantee you it's going to be amazing content. So
you're very kind.
Thank you for that. And I'll definitely look forward to that. Thank you all as well for joining me today. As always, we're here every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Next week, I will be bringing you yet another outstanding thought leader, Mr. Brian Solis, who is a multi-time best-selling author. He's a thought leader, and he is now the global innovation evangelist for Salesforce. So very interested to talk to him about that career shift He's a super interesting guy and a really wonderful human being. Thank you again. I'm Dan Gingiss, customer experience speaker and coach. Really appreciate you being here. Have a terrific weekend, and we'll see you next time on The Experience Maker.